Hi, and welcome to InfoSec Pros. I'm Kayne, CISO in residence at Hyperproof, and I'm joined today by Jon McLachlan, co-founder at YSecurity.io and Cyberbase.ai. Welcome to the show, Jon.
Kayne, thanks so much. Great to be here.
So glad to have you on, and just some fun trivia for our viewers and listeners. Just some fun trivia at the top here. I was on an episode that Jon filmed on his podcast some time ago. Do you remember how long ago that was, Jon? Was that
Oh, that
last year?
wasn't too long ago, was it, Kayne? It seems like just yesterday.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I was trying to look that up and see when's the last time we did this. Anyway, because this is a live stream, if you've got a question for Jon, or if you've got a question about YSecurity, Cyberbase.ai, or about Hyperproof, please drop it in the comments on either LinkedIn or on YouTube, and we're going to take those as we go. With that, Jon, I want to ask just at the top, what are some of the telltale signs you see in the marketplace that should prompt the CISO to move from less formal or informal security practices to really adopting a more formal compliance framework?
Yeah. No, thank you for asking. It's a great question. I think that generally speaking, the market is going to let you know. You know, if you're a founder, if you're a CISO, if you're responsible for the security of an organization, those design partners, those early adopters, they're going to start asking those security questions. And then we can take a step back and we can think about like, why do we do compliance at all, right? It's like, what's the point of our SOC 2 Type 2s and our ISO 27001s? Is really to demonstrate maturity in our organizational maturity, our security maturity. But really, it's so that every new potential customer that we bring on, if we're a B2B play, you know, we have to make sure that we're meeting the high bar for the expectation that's out there in the marketplace that our customers are presenting to us. And how do they get that assurance efficiently? Well, we have an audit. An auditor comes in, they make sure that we're doing everything that we say that we're doing, right? So,
So I want to double click on that one because there's probably a spectrum of possible formal compliance frameworks that an organization could choose to adopt. And I hope you'll agree with me that within each one of those, there's probably a subset of what good looks like and what sus looks like. And let me give two examples that often get held up side by side. And one of them would be a SOC 1, goodness us, right? And then let's throw in a third one. So a SOC 1, not even SOC 2. Second would be a SOC 2 Type 2, and the third one would be an ISO 27001 series or something in that neck of the woods. When you're thinking about moving from like, we don't have anything, we're getting all these security questionnaires, we're getting all these questions, people want us to do this thing, which of those do they start with? Or is there something else that they should start with?
you know, that's it depends on your area and your business goals, right? So that SOC 1, that's really for financial controls, right? It's digging into, you know, fiscally, like how do we operate as an organization? Is
Mm-hmm.
that auditable? When we realize revenue, like how do we realize that and what are the controls around that? For but you know, if you're a B2B play and you're bringing product to market, maybe you're a startup, maybe you're doing the 0 to 1 thing. Um, you know, a SOC 2 Type 2 is a great
Mm-hmm.
opportunity to demonstrate like, hey, we've, we've dotted our I's, we've crossed our T's. In the security space, we're operationally mature. You can depend on us. We're going to be able to meet the commitments that we're making. And how do we make commitments? We make commitments through our policies that then get turned into programs, security programs that,
Mm-hmm.
well, as it's not just for the security for the sake of security. We can actually use those programs to help scale our business up. And I think our customers out there, they really depend on us having all of those tools available to make sure that we can provide that high level of service, even a better level of service as we grow.
Okay.
Um, and then you also mentioned ISO. And ISO 27001 is very prescriptive. It lays out exactly like a very clear bar of like, here's where we need to be. And that's a little bit different from a SOC 2 Type 2. A SOC 2 Type 2 does more of like the verification that we do what we say that we do, and that we've
Mm-hmm.
considered all of these potential risks to our organization, and that we've addressed them. But we get to decide how we address them. For ISO 27001, it's a little bit more prescriptive. Like it it helps us address them more directly, let's say. Um, so just keeping it at a high level.
Okay, so it sounds like, your guidance, which I don't think, I think this is fairly aligned with what we see in the market too,
Mm.
is if you're in B2B, probably start with a SOC 2 type 2. Don't just decide, hey, we're going to go do ISO and build an ISMS just because that sounds funsies. Um, Even though I think and who knows, we might have time later in the show to talk about some of the weaknesses in SOC 2 type 2 and why that creates additional security questionnaires and drama at times. But thinking of both of those standards, neither of them had this thing. I'm not sure if I'm going to drop a new term here. I don't think our viewers have heard about this. There's this thing in the world called AI. Have you heard about it? Right? Wild, right? Spoil your
Crazy.
mind.
The
AI
world is
exists.
changing, isn't it?
Wow, right? And here's the
Who
thing.
knew?
At least it replaced the metaverse for the thing that everybody was talking about
Oh, thank goodness.
because, yeah, nobody can like drink a cup of coffee while they're wearing a Meta headset or a VR headset. I don't see that as feasible. So now
Right.
everybody's talking about AI. Um, ISO and SOC 2 were not contemplated and have not been updated since AI became the new hotness, right? So,
Right.
so are those creating new compliance challenges for organizations that just weren't on
Oh
anybody's
yeah.
radar, like in the past 5 years?
Yeah, not to mention there's a whole economy of startups. There's people doing the 0 to 1 thing around, taking advantage of all this new great technology, building new companies, new products, new experiences that leverage the AI that we now have available to us. And that stuff changes so quickly, which is another challenge that we face as security practitioners. We look at this changing landscape. There's new threat vectors. Um, there's new risks that need to be considered when we enter that space. And it's in addition to all of the good stuff that we've always, we've always done. If you're building a SaaS, it's pretty well understood, what we have to do to secure the SaaS. And now you look at the AI space, and not only is everything changing, but it's introducing new risks
Mm-hmm.
because we're taking advantage of this technology in really new and interesting ways. And we're able to bring some incredible experiences to market. Um, and the challenge, the opportunity for us as security practitioners is to get in front of that, is to participate in that discussion. And what does it mean to have secure AI systems? You know, and I think it really depends. Um, but it's all so new.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but at the same time, that doesn't mean like, we're up the creek without a paddle. Like luckily, we have ISO 42001, which
Mm-hmm.
just came out, which shares a little bit of guidance, right? How should we start structuring things? And if you're a founder and you're bringing, something to market, you have a new B2B, play, we have a new product that's being launched, you're probably facing all sorts of things when you go to market. Your customers, especially if they're larger enterprises, they probably have these things called like AI committees. Maybe several of our viewers are on AI committees, and it's one of these approaches that we've seen through all of our partners at YSecurity, bump into when you try to bring something to market. You're bumping into these AI committees, and they ask lots of really great questions. Um, so how do you navigate that as a security professional?
And is that kind of the thing to you that would like if you are in the B2B space, you're a founder, you're doing the 0 to 1 thing, or maybe you're doing the 10 to 100 thing,
Hmm.
and you start running into a lot of AI governance committees, and that's why your deals are falling apart or not moving forward. Is that the time that companies should start looking at AI governance requirements? Or is there some other signal that says, hey, we should stop, FOMOing our AI and we should actually do something a little more
Proactive,
cautious, perhaps, or
cautious.
proactive, as you
I
said?
uh, I
Yes.
like that word, cautious. Deliberate is another really good word that comes to mind. I mean, we want to be very deliberate. I mean, there's a spectrum, right? And on one side of the spectrum, it's like we don't have to do anything. We're not going to do any security, and so we don't need to add any special security mechanisms to our product. That's one extreme. On the other extreme, it's like, oh, we have to do all of these things, and we're going to load it up, and we're going to front load it, and we're going to invest. We're going to make this super heavy investment, um, and there's going to be a huge cost in both in terms of price, but also in terms of time and go-to-market time. And I think if you start losing deals because you're on the wrong point of that spectrum, like too close to the do nothing side,
Hmm.
you kind of end up chasing. And you don't really want to end up chasing the market, right? It's kind of a signal of like, yep, this is really needed if we're going to go after this, this vertical, if we're going to go after this industry, um, and we start losing deals because of our security posture, especially in the AI space. It means we've got a little bit of catching up to do. And so where I like to land is I like to land right before you get to that point.
Hmm.
And how are you supposed to know when to pull the trigger, or when to move on those signals? And I think that's a tough question, but it has to do with, the security story of a product. Like when we think about a product and we think about an entire organization that's supporting it, company, we have to answer the question, we're secure against who or what? And that has to be a simple answer. It has to be straightforward. Everyone in your organization needs to be able to understand it at a very core level. Um, and we can use compliance frameworks like a SOC 2, an ISO 42001 to help scale those programs out. But the answer to the question, like we're secure against who or what, should be very simple. And
Hmm.
it should be so simple that you can articulate that very quickly on a, on a sales call, or like that the entire sales team should be able to understand. And then, oh,
I
go
want
ahead.
to work through a couple examples for our viewers, because just
Please.
to make this a little less abstract and make it a little more tactical. So I'm thinking of two court cases that I'm tracking. One has settled mostly. It's in bankruptcy. One is definitely not settled. And the thing I'm wondering is if there's a reason to look for outside guidance before you get the engagement with the security questionnaire that you can't answer, or the AI governance committee that asks you difficult questions. So the two examples I'll give. One is engineer.ai, or otherwise known as builder.ai. That's example one. The example two is character.ai. Now, the idea behind engineer.ai or builder.ai was total vibes-based coding. It's like, hey, you're going to ask this LLM and it's going to go code a whole bunch of stuff for you, and that's cool. It turns out that might not have entirely been what they did, but the reason that that one failed was underlying financial fraud, actually. That's why they're going through bankruptcy proceedings. Everybody was like, oh no, it was supposed to be vibe coding, and it's actually just outsourcing again by a different name. That was actually untrue. That was demonstrably not accurate, but that's what the media seized on, is like, vibe coding is outsourcing. It's not. It was financial fraud happening behind the scenes. But the challenge was, what is the thing they should have thought of when launching a product that was going to say, like, hey, we're going to help do DevOps a lot faster without any of these things in place, right? And then the second one that I come to is B2C space, business to consumer space, which is character.ai, which is going to make like a friend for you, an AI friend that you can talk with, that you can have a conversation with, that you can chat with, and so on and so forth. And the problems that have come out there, and there's multiple pieces of litigation going on, came down to teenagers using that AI,
Yeah.
and some very negative effects that we won't get into here, but I'll just say they're not great. Follow me on LinkedIn if you'd like to see court updates on that one and my take on it. But again, it seems like in both of those cases, like they didn't think through, hey, what happens if a teenager, possibly with some underlying mental health issues, how do they engage with this, right?
Right.
Was there an opportunity for either of those? Should companies look at these things before they have a negative material effect, or should they wait for market signals?
Oh, no, no, no. Like being proactive is absolutely to everyone's best interest. Um, the investors, the folks running the companies, even the engineers in those companies. And being proactive just means being aware of the risks that we're taking, being intentional and deliberate about that, finding a path forward through, I get it. You may want to build a new friend mechanism, and all of a sudden, you start talking about some very private and personal things, and does that turn into PHI? And now are we subject to HIPAA and all sorts of like regulations? And not just regulations for the sake of regulations, but is there something like very sensitive and very human, like that starts happening on the platform? Being intentional and deliberate just means understanding those risks and understanding that space, uh, and thinking through that before shipping something to market, before putting it in users' hands. So yeah, I definitely think that being on the proactive side, not waiting for the market to tell us, like, hey, we need this or we need that before we can close this deal, in that B2B sense. Um, and just understanding and connecting the dots between what do we want to build as a business and
Hmm.
what is that product doing, right? In terms of security, we have to be very specific,
Okay, cool.
very
So
intentional, very deliberate.
I think that helps, and I do like the proactive approach there. And I think there's some market segmentation to, like, depending on what you're doing. If you're doing healthcare, obviously you've got a different sitch than you if you were doing B2C than if you're doing, I don't know, building a better spam filter. If anybody still builds spam filters these days, like there's clearly different requirements associated with those for
Mhm.
what you want to do with your business. I'll remind our viewers as well at this point, like this is a live stream. So if you've got questions for John, if you've got questions for me, if you want to see us react to a question, go ahead, drop them in the chat. We love interesting questions. I want to move to our first big topic though, and kind of bring these initial threads together and talk about like making a decision as a founder. Now is the time to do the thing. Now we need to do compliance because maybe we've been like checkboxing it, or maybe we've been acknowledging that, yep, that's on the to-do list for some point. Don't know when, but it sure sounds like a thing we should do. Um, I've seen a lot of companies, and I'm sure you have too, launch into this and go, we're out of our depth. We said we need to do compliance, and we thought we knew what it meant, and we don't. Oops, what do we do? So from your perspective, like, what are the things that need to be in place, the tactical things, before
Tactical
you
things
go
is,
after these compliance attestations?
yeah, definitely having someone on the team who's been there, done that, got the T-shirt, can help think through and help an organization be intentional and deliberate is a
Mm,
huge win for any organization. So if you're a founder, if you're a leader of an engineering org, you start getting um, these requirements being like, hey, we need a SOC 2 Type 2, and maybe your engineering team is just super focused on doing the 0 to 1 thing, adding all of the sort of magical experiences into your secret sauce. And you may look at all of these requirements for a SOC 2 Type 2. Maybe you've already been through it. And you just need that little extra help, that little extra horsepower, that guidance. Um, that's where a platform like Hyperproof could come into play to help map out, like, what is that going to take? When you actually need to sit down, think about timelines, think about deliverables, who's going to own all of these important requirements. That's maybe a little bit more like YSecurity. Um, but at the end of the day, you don't want to be flying blind. Like you do want to like loop in amazing folks who have been there and done that before, for sure.
yeah, and I think none of this is really like magical stuff. I can
Mm,
see that, like, you can say we're going to do compliance, and then I've seen companies not assign anybody to go do it, and they expect it's just going to grow like mushrooms in the front garden after a rain.
mm,
How do we take our SecOps team, our security operations team, which last time I checked, most SecOps teams are running pretty light and pretty thin, or lean, or whatever the term is today, where they just don't have a lot of time to take on additional work.
mm,
So if you're trying to say, we're going to do a compliance operation, maybe it's a SOC 2 Type 2, which has a security statement, which is mandatory, which says you have to show some stuff to some auditors.
yep,
Um,
yep.
how would you recommend leadership think about that investment? Like,
Yeah.
or perhaps resource reallocation if we know the SecOps team is already working at 120% efficiency?
Yeah, I think the way to think about those things and the way to think about security in general is not to think about it as a cost center, as like, oh, here's this thing that I have to do. It may absolutely be the case that here's this thing I have to do, but I think the right way to approach security and compliance in particular is to position it as part of the growth. And
Mhm.
so, as companies are growing, there's all sorts of pain points out there, not just in the marketplace, but internally too. As we grow as an organization, as we go from 50 to 100 to 200 to 400, there are very real pain points that if we don't have processes in place, uh, an organization won't be able to sustain that growth smoothly, right? And those are called growing pains, right? And even if you're a publicly traded company and you're in a new business unit, and that new business unit in this publicly traded company is growing because we're building a new like AI edition. It's the same. It's the same story. You'll experience the same growing pains even within a publicly traded company if there's not processes in place. And so I think the mindset from the very beginning is so critical. We have to align. And how do we think about security in terms of a growth engine? Like, what does that even mean? It means that we have to look at the marketplace to understand the answer to the question like why? Why are we doing this? And what's the goal? What's the business goal? Are we mm, building something for medical that could dip into that medical space? How do we consider all of those like those compliance needs in the medical
Mhm.
space? Or for defense, do we need to be ITAR compliant for defense? Do we need to think about FedRAMP for defense? If we're going after the financial industry, like if we're trying to sell product, a B2B product in the financial space, um, y- is it PCI DSS if we're going to go into the payment space? Or is there other signal that they're going to need specific in our product where we're going to meet their very high bar of expectation? Maybe that's something like end-to-end encryption, which is not a compliance thing. It's actually product security feature,
Mhm.
right? That you have to bake into your product. So it really depends, but aligning those security objectives with the growth of the company and pulling in amazing folks or reallocating the amazing folks that you already have, so that those initiatives don't become cost centers. They're part of your growth engine and they're absolutely critical to the success of the business.
So let me double click into that one just a
Sure.
little bit because you gave some clear, bright lines like finance, and that one's obvious. Medical or healthcare is it
Yep.
again. There's
Oh,
it's kind of like when my kids were little and they wanted to go on the roller coaster, and there was a sign that said you have to be at least this tall to get on the roller coaster.
yep.
And similarly, I think if you want to sell medical devices or get into finance, there is a bar. What about those companies that are in the mushy middle? Where there's no clear regulatory thing that says if you cyber harder or if you comply better, you're going to get money out of this process. Like, what about everybody else that's not in that highly regulated space where there's less clear boundaries established? When's the determination there that, hey, we need to take some of our SecOps team and reallocate them, or we need to hire more, or maybe we don't need to do this compliance thing because it doesn't necessarily generate money?
I think you have to talk to folks. Like you have to understand not just what's happening out there in the marketplace in terms of who you would like to sell to. You absolutely have to understand the bar for who you have to sell to, but you have to also appreciate that when those customers are making buy decisions, that it's not in a vacuum. It's not just you or nothing. It's not your
Mm-hmm.
company or nothing. It's like your company versus everything else in the marketplace. And so there's another approach. There's another way to think about this, another dimension, maybe it's the right way to put this, where you realize that you're just one choice of many, and you could use security actually as a market distinguisher, right? You could
Mm-hmm.
take that initiative, you could demonstrate leadership in your space, you could be the biggest fish in the smallest pond because you're the most secure, right? And even if it's not a traditionally like regulated space or um it may not be, oh, you need to be this hard, this tall to ride. Maybe you are that tall to ride,
Mm-hmm.
but there's like three other people trying to get on the same roller coaster and you happen to have the the highest, the tallest bar.
Is that why I always got to ride in the front of the roller coasters when I was?
I don't know, how tall are you, Caden?
I'm 6'2".
Ah, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. You can never tell on Zoom, you meet someone in
That's
real life
true.
and you're
Yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah. That
wow.
that that is very true.
We met in person not too long ago at the Gartner Security and Risk Conference, right? So
Yep, yep. That was fun.
that was good. Good
Yeah.
times.
Well, I want to bundle some of our threads together here because we're kind of talking about how to like assess product market fit to
Hmm.
figure out like, hey, is this a thing we need to do? And I'll remind our viewers again, like if you want to ask us questions, go ahead, drop them in the chat. We will be monitoring the chats. So when we think about product to market fit, what do you see as the relationship between a product and their compliance readiness in these less regulated spaces? Is it really just you're trying to gain a competitive advantage, or are there other factors between, again, thinking of like the vibes-based coding thing of engineer.ai or the litigation results of character AI? Like, is there some other relationship that we need to consider to decide we want to do compliance?
Well, I mean, it's how do you want to be perceived, right? Do you want to be perceived as like that vibe coding thing that, you use on a personal basis for side projects that, you punch it in a prompt and it prompt enhances and then like 3 hours later it spits out something that you would never share in a live demo with anybody, you know? Or are
You
you
haven't been
going
on enough demos lately, John. Some of the stuff that you see out there is just wild.
no, and it's getting better every day. It is. But is that what you want, flying your airplane or administering chemotherapy? Uh there's different bars in different places, and it's about understanding, and I think it's about appreciating that, yeah, we can write code faster, but there are tools out there that are specifically geared towards shipping very high quality product, such as Augment Code, for example. Augment Code is absolutely the best AI. It's not the vibe coder. It's the we're going to ship real product to real engineers who are delivering a very high bar, for security, and we need to take advantage of the absolute best context engines and LLMs, and um, it it does meet an extremely high bar. They're the first to achieve a SOC 2 Type 2, so they
Oh, okay.
demonstrated their commitment to security in that mechanism. They also went off and we got ISO 42001. So the the first engineering AI platform to achieve sort of this new AI standard that ISO has just put out. So
Oh, that's cool. That's a success story or potential success story. I'm sure the market will eventually decide that one. Something else I've seen. I talk to a lot of CISOs when I go to things. I'm going to go to Black Hat next week and talk to a whole whack of CISOs about
oh,
everything.
you'll be in Vegas. Are you doing DEF
Uh,
CON too?
I usually stick around for the first day. I've got weekend plans, but I'll probably be there on the first day and go to some of the parties and some of the things. My challenge with DEF CON is it's often like people want to light stuff on fire and see when I light it on fire, it burns. They don't get into here's how to build a better fire extinguisher. Here's how to prevent it from lighting on fire. Usually it's like, check out this cool POC that totally nukes everything. Isn't it neat? And then they stop their talk, and I feel sad because they don't talk about how to fix it or how to make the world a better place.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's usually why I'm good for. I will be one of the 4 people in a kilt at DEF CON. The other 3 will all be wearing black utility kilts. Love them, but step up your game, folks. Rotating away from that, I want to
Yeah.
go onto a different tact from your last points you made.
Oh,
So
please.
you gave some really good examples of why compliance. I want to ask the flip side, why not? Like we've seen CISOs, and I'm thinking of like some of the folks I'm going to talk to next week are going to say, like, is it just a solution looking for a problem to solve? Like how does somebody know? How does a founder know? How does a CISO know that they shouldn't do compliance, that it's not the right time, that this isn't the good day to start this conversation?
Well, I mean, one clear signal is like you don't have product in market.
Okay.
Right. I mean, if you're going to get your SOC 2 Type 2 before you start having those conversations around like, would you like to use this product? It's kind of putting that the horse in front of the carriage a little bit, because part of the goal with building your security program has to be to service a particular market, to service the needs of a space. You don't want to be stretched too thin. And if you're stretched too thin, you do end up, um, you do a lot of stuff, but you don't do any one thing that well,
Hmm.
right? So, mm, I think it's very healthy to understand, you know, the customer. It's very healthy and it's very important to understand who else is in the space. You have to understand and see, if you pull the trigger on this security investment or that security investment, it doesn't necessarily need to be compliance. It could be a product security feature. It could be customer managed keys. It could be end-to-end encryption. Um, it could just be that you integrate with all of the SSO providers, and if you're lucky enough to be in a space where no one else has done that, like maybe that's that's what you need to
Hmm.
for that next step of growth. I also think that there's like too much. There is a such thing as doing too much planning, and you have to be careful with that one too, because you know, a- as all of this stuff changes, people are forced to pivot. Organizations are forced to pivot. Organizations of every size are forced to pivot. Like who knew like we would be so advanced so quickly and that these LLMs would be so commoditized so quickly, right? Um, so is the future really going to be in like who has the best LLM in the AI space, or is it going to be a little bit more of like who can build, the best context engine on top of these LLMs, or the most secure context engine, or the right data protection mechanisms that are, pulling in data across your ecosystem for the context, you know, mechanisms to provide the LLMs with super rich context. Things change.
Yeah.
So we have to adopt and adapt with those changes too.
Okay. So let me I'm going to try and simplify that just for myself and for our
Please.
viewers. And again, viewers, questions, drop them in the chat. The thing I'm thinking here is, so you said you need to have a product in the market, right? You need, like, you shouldn't go do security, attestations, compliance stuff until you've at least got something you're shipping.
Hmm.
I hope I'm not mischaracterizing that one. And I heard that it has to have a fit, and I heard that we have to be intentional and proactive
Hmm.
about that, and maybe look for market signals that say people are asking about your absence of these things. Is there a revenue aspect to this too? Like, let's say you drop a product into the market and it's not making any money, or it's not like you're still not operating in the black, right? You're still traditional startup. Your burn rate is a little too high. Is that a sign to not do compliance
You
and do
know,
something else with our limited
I'm
resources?
not sure like revenue should be a strong signal for to do compliance or not to do compliance. I think security in general can be connected to the growth. And so instead of thinking about the bottom line and like looking at the bottom line and being like, oh my goodness, we're operating in the red. Um, yeah, all startups operate pretty much in the red for a certain amount of time, and you get that feedback. You bootstrap a product, you get that in market. You identify where you're adding value. You want to be the biggest fish in the smallest pond, um, and somewhere along that journey, early in that journey, you don't want to be chasing, um, sales deals, saying like, "Oh, I'll have my SOC 2 Type 2 in 3 months. Just give me a second." That's 3 months that you're not going to get real value out there in the marketplace. You want to be ahead of that. So it's not that you want to wait for your potential customers to be asking at the front door, like, "Hey," but you do need an organizational commitment that you're going to go after this market, and to go after this market, you need to have a certain, that to get on the roller coaster, you need to be at a certain height, and
Right.
that's the SOC 2 Type 2, or it's an ISO, or maybe it's a set of product security features. And to be intentional and deliberate as you approach that market is it is not just healthy for the organization, but it denotes confidence and leadership in your field. And that's where you want to be. That's how you hit that growth wheel. And it becomes a flywheel. and you hit it at just the right point, at just the right time, really incredible things happen.
And it's funny, one of our viewers just dropped in a question which ties in very nicely to what you were saying there about building that growth flywheel. And the question is, how should companies balance compliance as a growth enabler versus compliance as a checkbox for buyers? And that lines directly to what you were saying. Any other guidance there on that balancing act?
Yeah, compliance is a checkbox. I've heard of that many times. I think that's a mindset. That's a mindset. So if you can see compliance as a tool to help an organization grow, it doesn't become overheaded. It's not part of the bottom line. It's not something that you have to manage and continuously like reduce the cost because it's just something that you have to do, right? If you can see compliance as part of your growth engine, connect it to the success of the sales deals that you're landing. Position it as enabling growth. And internally, like, if you have your security program and maybe there's a little bit of struggle to get everything adopted, invite folks that would normally see these like, oh, quote unquote things we have to do for checkbox purposes. It's like, no, it's not a checkbox. This is actually absolutely critical to the growth of our organization as success as a business, as a startup. We all have equity in a startup, presumably, hopefully. And to make that worth something in the future and to do our customers justice, like they're expecting a certain level of maturity. And like when someone is offboarded, to just go through and like pop them off all of the required systems and to go down that checklist of the offboarding checklist maybe seems tedious and silly in some cases, especially if it's our friend. But to do it and to do it on time means a great deal to the success of the organization.
Okay, all right, and I hope that also answers our viewers' question. I want to bring in the board of directors here, and I want to start bringing in investors, whether they're seed investors or whether they're, I don't know, early stage, Series A, Series B investors, later phase investors, because I think they've both got an interest in seeing things succeed, but they've also got an interest in helping to ensure that businesses are operating efficiently and that they're not over rotating into any one thing that doesn't get them a desirable exit outcome, right? Because that's how investors tend to think. Board members tend to think a little bit differently, especially if they're on publicly traded companies. But if we're talking about startups here, they're looking for an exit. They're looking for a good exit, and whatever that is, how do they get there? So when we're, as senior leaders, chatting up the board, right? When should we start talking to them about compliance timing or compliance motions? And for those board members that might not have a background in security, how do we explain the difference between checkbox compliance or doing the thing because somebody told you to do the thing, like security theater, and actually doing meaningful compliance and risk reduction?
Yeah, I think the value shouldn't be like on the compliance piece. I think the value should be in delivering an amazing product and an amazing experience into customers' hands. And part of that story has to be security. And then the question becomes, how do we implement security programs and policies? How do we have policies that will scale with our organizations? And how do we have programs that will meet our high bar of expectation for ourselves and that our customers will bring to us? How does that actually work? Well, we have this tool. It's called compliance. We can go off and get a SOC 2 Type 2. Here's how that will enable all of our security commitments as an organization. And once we have that audit, we can have a year-long audit window, or we can go off and get an ISO 27001. We can have the discussion around which tool might be the best for us as an organization. Phrasing it like that, I think, is much more palatable. And then as leaders of these organizations, we can actually use those tools as a way to grow extremely quickly without crumbling underneath, the weight of that new growth, that fresh growth.
Yeah, I think I want to kind of get into this one a little bit deeper because I don't think compliance is security, and I hope a lot of our longtime viewers agree that compliance is just straight up not security. And like you
Hmm.
could go back to, I don't know, the Target, or that's the French version of Target. You could go
Hmm.
back to them, or if you think about something more recent, you remember a couple years ago you couldn't go to the store and buy bleach. Actually, you couldn't buy a lot of cleaning products because Clorox got straight up wrecked by Scattered Spider. And what's coming out is it looks like they had all the attestations, all the compliance, all the things. They make interesting products like bleach. Obviously, they're doing chemical manufacturing, right?
Hmm.
And still they got wrecked,
Hmm.
right? So, how do we? Are there any other pieces of guidance or advice you'd have for companies to avoid those long tail outcomes where you think you're doing security well, where you think you're doing compliance well, but again, you've built a paper tiger that doesn't really either survive adversarial engagement or engagement with an auditor who's credible and can say, well, show me how this works, and you know, maybe you can. Like, how do we avoid that outcome?
Yeah, I think that any problem that can be separated probably should be separated. It's a really good engineering rule of thumb. In terms of compliance and security, it's also a good rule because those compliance frameworks, they don't really change that much, right? And
That's
I
true.
think as security professionals, we always have to keep that commitment to our security posture like current, and we constantly have to update ourselves. And every new feature that goes through a product security review, we're asking one simple question: does this contribute to us telling that single very simple security story? Are the answer to the question, we're secure against who or what? And if anything steps into play that throws that into question, or there's a gray space on an edge case, or how do we handle this, as security professionals, yeah, we have to dig into those, do them justice so that we can confidently continue, you know, delivering these amazing experiences to product and not end up in the news for the wrong reason.
That's fair.
I,
I want to ask though, like, is it a security team's job? And the reason I ask this is I've seen a lot of security teams try and do hero mode,
Mhm.
where they want to implement controls on systems they don't own. I'm going to use two very simple examples: accounts payable, accounts receivable, right? Money coming in the door, money going out the door, right? Every business has these. And I've watched security teams try to apply controls to these, and inevitably it's a bit of a bad time because they don't own the system, they don't own the process, they're not the business leader. Is there a responsibility here of other business leaders to select those controls and maybe ask
oh
for
yeah,
help in the application? And when I say
yeah,
controls as well, just for our viewers' sake, controls are people and then process. And then there's this third thing that we all seem to all go to, especially like I love everyone who's watching, but honestly, we all over rotate into technology. That's the third class of control, right?
hmm
Is there a time to have that conversation with the business leaders about their control selection and their own like risk aversion or risk tolerance?
oh, I think so. And I think the way to approach that is to see folks not as these pieces of risk scattered about your organization that need control, that we need to go in as security professionals and control or implement things for them. When I interact with people, I always assume two things. One, that they're smart and it's on me to figure out and to see like what they're bringing to the table. And the second thing that I assume is that they want to do the right thing. They want to do the right thing. Everyone wants to do the right thing. Um, and so what that means is when there's a disagreement or friction inside of an organization, it just means that I'm not doing a very good job explaining the context and presenting like what's going on, and why something might actually be important for us as an organization. And I can share what I think as a security person. But if I'm unable to share from a point of view of like, look, I'm the security person, sure, but as an organization, this is important for our organization, and we're all in the same boat together. And we need these things to happen. There's two types of security people in this world, right? There's the type of security person who will walk into a meeting. Maybe this is to discuss roadmap or some future strategy, and everyone in that room will be like, Oh no, John is here. He's just going to say no to everything and tell us to go back to the drawing board. And no, we can't do that. It violates like our security principles. And and then there's another type of security person. You walk into exactly that same meeting with exactly the same people, and people will be like, "Oh, I'm so thankful. John is here. He's going to help us, yeah, keep our security bar very high as we deliver on aggressive timelines for this new feature and this new market that we're trying to go to. And he'll even probably help like identify what are the compliance, pieces that are going to be needed, and the product security features, and how to align all of this with our very high security posture." And you can be effective as both types. I've seen both types many times, and you can be effective. Like it's mindset. And if you
Mhm.
build, relationships that are positive, and you enable other people to be successful, you will get like it's just easier to get, you know, everyone realizing. We just have to realize it. We just realize that we're all in the same boat together, you know.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
there's that friction.
I think that that's really a good point. Is that shared sense of purpose and that shared sense of direction. I saw a viewer question come in. I just want to go down a very short rabbit hole here and get your take on it. Some of you know I run a private CISO roundtable. Lots of fun, bunch of friends. We sit around and talk about CISO stuff.
Mm.
And one of the challenges that CISOs are currently facing at the highest level is being perceived as the Department of No. Right? We've
Yeah.
we've rotated back into that concern, and it's been generally about AI, where companies are looking at their chief security officer and their chief information security officer, depending on title, and saying like, how are you enabling the business? And I've heard claims of companies saying, well, we're going to get a 25% employee productivity out of AI,
Right.
and then they proceed to not train their people on how to use the AI or even what to do with it, but they just say, we're going to get productivity. How should CISOs be, from your perspective, how would you counsel CISOs approach that type of situation where they're charged with defending the business when the business is saying, throw off all these shackles, let's just go and see what happens?
I think everyone has, in that discussion, this is an open discussion that's still going on. And to be an active participant in that, I think means, not just saying no. I think it means double clicking and really appreciating and understanding, okay, what are the risks? What are the specific risks? If we're going to throw this type of data into this type of system, where is my data going? How is it being used? Is anyone going to be training on that data? What does
Mm-hmm.
that mean for us as an organization? Okay, there's one bucket like training. How about IP? If the IP starts coming out of these generative AI systems and I start using that in a proprietary sense, am I at risk? There's another like giant bucket of risk, right? That we have to consider as security professionals. Not to mention like all of the traditional, security questions around, using a SaaS, using a third party. Those are all still on the table, and I totally get it. I totally understand when, security folks are presented with something new, and our initial reaction is like, well, I have a lot of responsibility here. I don't have time to dig into all of these important questions. They're important questions, but right now the answer is no, and that's totally valid. It's totally valid to protect an organization. Where I think we can position ourselves as partners to these organizations trying to adopt and trying to take advantage of all of the great new technology that's out there is to partner and to, you know, I don't want to say pump the brakes on everything else, but just approach it with a sense of curiosity where we're bringing that security expertise and we realize like we're bringing that to the table and, you know, being open to the possibility that there is a path forward here where we can have both. We can have both like meet our high security bar,
Mm-hmm.
protect our data, protect the organization, and still enable a 20 or 30% productivity boost somehow.
Yeah, yeah, and we're going to see, I think, in the market how well that one shakes out. Myself, I'm a bit skeptical. I think I had a LinkedIn article up on that on Monday. But speaking of skepticism, I want to go to a great viewer question, and thank you for this one. Wow. I suspect there's a story behind this question too. And the question is, are there ways compliance can be misused to create a false sense of momentum or maturity in front of investors or the board? And how can these be avoided? Boy, howdy. If you're going to
Oh yeah.
Black Hat next week and you wrote that question, find me, spill the tea, not the app. I want to know what the background is on this question because it's a banger. John, what do you think?
Oh yeah, I'm sure. It's a tool, right? And tools can be used for both good and you could be a little bit sneaky with them too, right? Like absolutely you could. Um, I hope that that's not the case more often than not, right? But and then the question becomes like, well, if the tools that we have available to us are not going to signal like maturity or a certain type of security, bar, so to speak, to ride the roller coaster, then what might? And I think oftentimes if you have the conversations, if you do the double click, just one conversation with whoever's responsible for security in an organization, you can glean a lot off of conversation like that. Um, some auditors are more reputable than others. I think everyone probably has heard of coal fire. They didn't pop up overnight, and they have a pretty strong reputation. So,
They have a pretty good talk track for conferences about a courthouse in Iowa, too.
oh, really? What's that?
Oh, yeah. Oh, go ahead. Look that one up. That's like free beer for those two guys forever from now on. It was about a physical security thing. Coal
Mm,
Fire, Iowa Courthouse. Just go ahead, search that right now. I want to give a different take on this one, John, because
mm,
I see like this idea of compliance being used as a false sense of security or, to create a false sense of maturity. And it's funny, you mentioned auditors. I was having a drink with an auditor friend of mine, and we were sharing horror stories.
mhm,
And I thought I had a one-off. I was like, you're never going to believe this. This is a thing that I saw in the world, and it can't possibly nobody else. And what had happened is the company, and I won't. They had decided that instead of using a off-the-shelf compliance tool,
mhm.
something like Hyperproof or shoot something like Excel,
Love it, love it.
they
Oh,
decided that they'd have one of their lead programmers write this thing, and it was this combination of code, and I was brought in to audit it and like do an assessment. And for a while it was just ticking along just nicely and everything looked really good, and then we kind of got into the gubbins of it. And to make a long story short, this engineer had figured out what were the things that influenced their annual bonus. Boy, did those look really good. They consistently like crushed that number. Everybody in their department was getting a bonus.
mhm,
Everybody's happy.
mhm.
The rest of it, maybe not so much. There were some security controls that were not represented. There was no evidence collected for some of these. And the thing that I'd say, and again, my auditor friend and I, like, he was like, oh yeah, I saw that at a Fortune 500 company once. And I was like, oh no. And we then had to compare if it was the same client. It wasn't. So my recommendation would be, if you decide to do compliance, whatever you do, don't write it yourself, right? Like there
Please
are
don't.
tools in the market like Hyperproof, like
Yep,
other tools
yep.
that if you apply them, you don't run the risk of internal malfeasance for misrepresenting your security or your compliance stance
Right,
to your investors, to your board, to the
right.
public. Because when that comes out in litigation, it is like pure nightmare fuel for everyone involved, right? It's not exactly Enron WorldCom level stuff, although I
Mm,
think the PCAOAB's made some comments about investor protections and audit skepticism that really align and cover back to AI. But I
mhm.
think like if you're gonna go do compliance, like don't make this stuff up on your own, right? Does that sound like a reasonable one, John?
Oh, absolutely. Just like cryptography, don't write your own cryptography, please. Like, let's not do that. There are amazing tools out there in the marketplace, Hyperproof being one of them. YSecurity, here at YSecurity, we operate the entire security function of several companies, and we never just wing it, right? There's always a tool involved. You have to be methodical, and there are entire companies built around these things. So, and to circle back on abuse of, using compliance to paint a false picture, and the devil really being in the details in that one. Scope is another thing that I would always check for. If
Hmm.
you're going to get SOC 2 Type 2, make sure it's scoped to the product that you do really want to certify and audit. Although SOC 2 Type 2 is not a certification, but have your attestation in hand for. So
I think
just
that's
just
yeah,
read it.
yeah,
Read the report. I know
yeah.
they tend to be long, but they're
They're good
filled with
reading though.
they're
There's a lot of good details in there. And there's also, I think that organizations, the other thing I'd say is like, just to your point, use that. Don't just read it and put it down and go, cool, we'll do this all again next year. Learn from it. Like companies that succeed well in this space tend to have a culture of continuous improvement where they go, here are the material deficiencies that were found or these potential deficiencies. Which of these should we prioritize, go fix?
Yep.
Right? Because if you don't go fix them, the auditor is going to come back. And where I found like real weird things is you see the same compliance failure 3 years in a row, and you go, so is anybody like reading this stuff, or are they just like,
And you know what?
we're
I get
helpless?
it. Like it's really dense reading. They can be extremely long sometimes. And we're busy. But that's also why we built Cyberbase.ai, which is an AI security agent that uses your internal security posture to help, answer security questions. If you drop someone else's SOC 2 Type 2 report into your Cyberbase portal, it can summarize it like very quickly for you. So,
Yeah, it's kind
and
of like
look,
what we have with the partnership with Hypercomply, where similar basic idea of that having humans answer questionnaires is not the best value for anybody's buck.
yep,
And I just clocked the time. I have one last question before we go to
oh,
wrap here.
please.
Um, we've lost track of the time, which is always a good
Oh,
sign for
it's
me.
it's a good it's a good
I want to
conversation.
bring us back to like competitive advantages. So for those companies that they've been listening to us and they're like, this is the time we see the signals, we see the benefits, we think we see the benefits.
Hmm.
What are those advantages for those companies that are going for compliance earlier in their market development? And do they get it? Is there a longer tail advantage that they inherit as the market matures and as more compliance becomes table stakes?
Yes, absolutely. It's time to market. Time to market gets you into deals faster. You get feedback loops sooner. You can and it's not just feedback loops from the smaller folks who are not cognizant of security. These are going to be the feedback loops that are extremely valuable. You get into those sooner, and it does have a long tail effect. And you come out perceived as the leader for the particular space, not just by one or two customers, but by the industry, and that's what you want. So it does pay off. It really does. You have to be careful with doing that too early, but
Hmm.
doing that before your competitors is perfect.
Yeah, I think that's really
It's a sweet
can
spot.
develop a sustainable advantage.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Cool. This has been so much fun, John. I want to thank you for being on the show today. And if you're watching this, if you know somebody who we should have on the show, or alternatively, if you're that person who should be on the show, drop a note in the comments or just DM me directly at LinkedIn. With that, John, really want to thank you again for joining us and thank our audience again for tuning in on today's live stream. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for joining us. Thanks, Kane.